Hello my friends, I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and welcome to another episode of Masterclass. This is the Gooey Cube, The Darkest Dream, Part 1 of the Red Star Rising campaign, Part 2. Now the first part, we kind of went over the contents of the adventure because, well, it comes in a box with all kinds of fun things. And I talked about the importance of some of the different elements to it. The handouts being very important, the illustrations and portraits really helping to flesh out the world. I talked about the split books and how that was a useful thing, and the handouts for the special items, and the GUI rewards, and how approaching the leveling in the game is different from most other games you play. Sure, I did all of that, but there's a lot of meat left on the bones. So today I'm going to cover what is essentially the Session 0 for the game. Now a Session 0, if you aren't familiar with it, is a session before the game actually gets started. The need for a Session 0 isn't as great with The Darkest Dream as long as your players are willing participants and have done the work needed, which is a little bit of reading, to be ready to hit the ground running. So, what do you need to do that? So as I said last time, this pamphlet is extraordinarily important for opening up your game. If your players read this, if say they take notes, they really do try to absorb this, you really almost don't need a Session 0. They know the premise. They are ready to hit the ground running. So, number one, they know the time, the place, and the significance of it. So they should have a bit of a creeped out factor as the day goes on and it gets closer to Darktide. People in the world do. It's the most ill-aspected time of the year. And it's important because these events are going to take place on that night. Foreshadowing, sure. Now also, as well as being introduced a bit to the world of Xayathay, which is useful, knowing the nature of the world around you can be very useful. The section 2, the Blue Veil Troop, is in my mind the most useful element and most useful handout I think that's ever been handed out in preparation for an adventure. Oh yeah, handing out ones during the adventure is wonderful, but with the Blue Veil Troop, your characters have two things going for them. Number one, they will have some passing familiarity with the people you're going to be name dropping. Okay? They should know who Borag and Kalnase are in the Blue Veil Troop. And if you haven't read this yet, Borag is dad, Kalnase is mom. They are the Pravda and Magda of the troop, and the buck stops with them. They make the decisions that keep the troop going, and they are both self-sacrificing, wise, and powerful. This is a good thing to understand, both from the player's perspective and as the game master's perspective, because if they get cross with the players know there's going to be consequences. They're going to be doing extra work. They're going to be working hard to get out from underneath them being angry with them. And nobody would want that, you know. None of the characters are the kind that would go poking trouble in the eye specifically to the point to irritate members within their troop. That's not very good role play. And with Borag and Kalnase, there should be a feeling that they would sacrifice anything except for the troop itself for their children. They would go to great pains to make sure that everyone stays alive and as healthy as reasonably possible. And it's a tough world, and they understand that too. It's important to understand that many of the members of the Blue Veil Troop are afflicted in one way or the other, either with a blood touch, which marks them as outcasts in many societies, or afflicted with a disease here or there that may cripple them, that would make them a subject of charity at best in most civilized lands. With the Hanatas, people like Stoof, who is a respected member of the troop, and he employs his skills and makes the troop money and lightens everyone's load with his gifts of brewing. And Lena, his wife, who, again, she's a bit strict, but she is mom, and she wants to take care of everybody too. She understands the role that they have to play and knows that they are due a certain respect, and they're very proud of their son Ventov, who is a player character and can be one of the characters that the players choose. A few of the player characters have some affliction or another, mostly Fleegan, but many of them are marked in some way and can't just travel around society without at least suspicion, if not downright hostility. So, to the troop, you belong as part of survival, as part of tradition, as part of the debt that you owe your family for taking care of you when you couldn't do that for yourself, for giving you the skills that you needed to get to the point where you can hold up your end of the bargain. So, the importance of this work to put the players in the place where this whole thing opens up saves you almost everything you need in a session 0. They understand who they are and where they come from, and most importantly, what brings them to this particular point. They are setting up for their Carnival, or setting up for another day of Carnival, the last of the days perhaps. And this gives the entire thing motion. It starts at a very fixed point and progresses from there. And that's exactly what you want with a session 0. So, somehow get this to the players before you even start is my strongest suggestion to you. Now, you could do something as ham-fisted as just read it for your players in the beginning, but that's 6 pages. It's a little on the long side. You could cut out all of the glossary if you'd like, and that would cut it down to, what, 4.5 pages? Which is doable, certainly. The players may get sick of listening to you. It's hard to absorb when just lectured to for a length. I prefer giving this out to the players in advance and giving them the responsibility of reading it. Now, if they don't read it, it's gonna suck for them. And that's why, if you are a player watching this, which soon I'm going to tell you it's stuff for the Game Masters only, and I'll tell you to leave, know this stuff. It's good information. And it's really what it really helps to immerse you and get you into the mindset of a person in this society. So, this absolutely must. Hand this out to your players. Get this information to them. It'll help you to start out. So, that's probably one of the biggest things. But then comes the individual characters. Now, you can make your own characters up. I'm not going to tell you can't. There are some character classes that are just simply not available here for one reason or another. The Artificer is a pretty popular class these days. You're not going to find one in here. Warlocks. Some people really like Warlocks. There are no Warlocks in this game. And if you understand the tenor of the game and the circumstances that you find yourselves in, some of that might make sense. For one thing, as far as a Warlock, having somebody who's conflicted about which master they're serving the troop and the well-being of your family and friends, or serving some infernal or fey or whatever master. It's not too likely, for instance, that Jinx, one of the more revered of the gods of Xayathay to the Hanataz, really would have warlocks. It's not really his thing. So, just saying, there's not a lot of opportunities for inserting a warlock into this role because everybody knows everybody. If somebody actually popped up with a pact, people would know about it. Borag and Kalnase would not be happy, nor would other people who understand such things. Brother Anton would probably be pretty cross about that unless it was something that, was really beneficent. I suppose a celestial pact could work, but it's not something that's really cooked into the infrastructure of the game. Likewise, artificers generally thrive when they have lots of room to have stuff. They are a class of stuff. Not really something that the traveling lifestyle lends itself to, quite honestly. And when you think about how many wagons they have and how many people are in the troop, the player characters have a very small amount of space, just enough for their bare personal belongings. So, an artificer does not have the room to have like a workshop and stuff like that. Could you make this? Of course you could. But that's why it's not in the game. Also, personal biases from some of the writers, of course. Alphinius doesn't like warlocks. Fair enough. But there's good reasons for the characters that are there to be who they are. Likewise, the one paladin in the group, who is pretty cool, isn't the kind where he's going to, yell in your face and get all up for no reason other than his religion. His whole story is kind of a neat one if you get to read it, but it's not the kind that's going to take over and compromise the interests of the group or the troop in general, which is good. Very good restraint and development. But about those characters. Okay, so you got 24 characters to choose from. Now you'll notice a couple of things, and I've got two. I've got a fighter and I've got a spellcaster here, so we'll take a look at these. First of all, Theros Vegla. Theros Vegla is the son of Borag and Kalnase, so it's kind of, if nepotism was really a big deal, he'd be like the prince. Nepotism is not a big deal among the Hanataz. He may want to one day be the Bravda of the troop and be responsible for leading everybody, and he's certainly probably being groomed for it, but it's not a given. It's up to the Banan, the hetman, the elders of the troop, to decide when Borag dies or steps down, when Kalnase dies or steps down, who's going to take those roles on. So Theros may never get to that point. And, quite honestly, at his stage in his life, he might not really want it that badly. I mean, he's still a young fella, pretty darn good looking, as long as he can get around the tusks. Massively muscular. But he does carry a blood touch, so he's pretty much bound to the troop. It's not like he's going to go off and be a politician or anything. So, the character, now that you see it, first of all, the first thing your eyes fix on is that beautiful piece of art. Every character has their own unique piece of art, which was done, and the Gooey Cube portraits are excellent. I can attest to that myself. But these are, great illustrations so that you can visualize the character more easily. So if you do nothing else but flip through and look through the pictures, you will see some of them are unusual looking, some of them are strapping and handsome, some of them are kind of outlandish, but they're all unique characters. So that's the first thing that you'll see. And that's what everybody else will see as well. So, you be prepared to show off this piece of art. Now, you've got a background that explains your place within the troop. How did you get your training? Who your parents are, if you knew. How long have you been with the troop? These are things that the other characters would already know about you. So they're not secret at all. And they, again, put your character in the moment and give you a history to draw from so that you can use that to guide your character moving forward. If you'll pay a little bit of attention, you'll notice that there's really not any alignments or anything like that, because they don't make sense in this scope of the game. Not a lot of need for holiness or profane, powers that might clash. This is about character. This is about personality and drive and duty and responsibility. So alignment, it really isn't the motivating factor here. But if you look through, you will see the bonds clearly laid out for your character. Who you feel the closest kinship with. Who did you spend the most time learning your craft? Who do you have feelings for among the troop? Many of them have folks that they consider to be as brothers, as sisters. And that helps to develop the story. And if you have two people who pick out characters with a link like that, it gives you something they can role-play with together, which can be nice. It can be stifling for some people to feel like I've got these feelings. And quite honestly, once you've picked your character, it's yours. You do with it as you want. But, you should try to be guided by these backgrounds. And notice, all of the backgrounds, nobody has a storyline where they're constantly a loner, constantly fighting against authority. There's no room for that in the troop. Anybody who can't be a part of the troop is left behind. there's nowhere else to turn to. So for most of these people, they're happy to be with the troop. You should think about that too. If you're the kind of person who likes to thumb your nose at a storyline that's in front of you, you're not going to have fun with this one. It's really the best to feel like you're a part of it, even if your actions take you in different directions. Now also, they all have a secret. A little single paragraph or two, nothing too serious, but it's the dark recesses of their heart, and it's not always bad, by the way. It's just something that the others wouldn't know. And whenever you are surrounded all the time by family, you cherish the one thing that is uniquely yours that you don't share with other people, and everybody has that. Now, some people might be pretty open about their secrets. They might, go on their face value. I had an experience that got me this, and I'm going to talk to the rest and see if they can help me with it. That's up to you. That's your prerogative to do with your secret as you wish. Not all of them are shameful. Not all of them are, something sinister. Several of them look very much like they're going to tie into the story at some point, however. So keeping them in mind is a very good thing when you're actually playing these characters. Not all of them have anything earth-shattering, though, and generally most of them aren't going to change the way you roleplay the character. But they're just something to keep in the back of your mind. So, and as I said, there's 24 of them. Now we can look really quickly at Vanessa Lanas. Now, pronunciation, the apostrophe show accent and breakage. So, Vanessa, it's not Vanas, it's Vanessa. Alanas, Alanas. So, it's not Alanas, it's Alanas. It's a little separation. And, again, you'll know these characters on a first-name basis because all the characters are family to each other. You're not going to constantly call each other by your surname. But because of the unique nature of the troop, they don't all share the surname. So they respect that part of your background, too. What makes you different from the others helps to keep the group stronger as a whole. So Vanessa here is an elf, and she's a druid, and she does not have a visible blood touch. What does that mean? Well, elves aren't the most common in the parts where the adventure takes place, but she could walk into a town and nobody's going to throw her out unless they hate elves for some reason. So she does not have a supernatural cast to her. She doesn't have horns. She doesn't have any of the trappings that various blood touches have. Which means that outside of the fact that she's an outsider by culture, she's been raised a good portion of her life with the Hanatas, and the fact that she's got her own bent, which nature has given to her from her experiences as a druidess, she actually can hide amongst the normal people if she chooses to. So that's kind of a neat thing. And again, she has her story, and she has her secret, which is some element of her life that the other players would not know and would not be privy to. Could Vanessa go and talk about that with other people, wanting to share more, not wanting to hold back secrets? You can, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's character development after all. But it's not required, nor would I encourage it. Just let it be as it will. That's my philosophy as a game master. Alright, so you've got that. Now you flip the page over, and you have all these game stats. These are game stats. So, as they are pre-generated characters, a lot of the things are going to be determined for you already. You have your basic statistics. Now, I'm going to warn you about this because I ran up against this myself. If you don't want to hand out your master copies of your pre-generated character sheets, and you're going to photocopy, you would need an incredibly fine scanner and printer to be able to see anything when you're done copying this. Even with a laser printer that I've got, I can't read the numbers that it printed without, good, really powerful reading glasses. Part of this is because some of the writing is on color, and if you're going grayscale, that can be a real problem. But even if you've got a printer that has color, it's still rough. So, be prepared to ink things in on the character sheets if you reproduce them. Even with the originals, I still have a hard time viewing it. So, be aware. That might be an issue as you go. But it, doesn't have to be necessarily. It can just be another part of, giving you a little of license. Like, for example, with Vanessa here. I like Vanessa. Vanessa is cool. But Vanessa starts out as kind of, well, she's a druidess. Her weapons are a sickle, a dagger, and a dart. Experienced D&D players will note that those weapons are rubbish. They are basic D4 weapons. She has no great weapons to start with. So what would Vanessa do? Just because that's what's on her sheet means that's the stuff she's accustomed to walking around with. But if she goes looking for trouble, for instance, there's nothing to say that she wouldn't go out and cut herself a nice staff so she could have a quarterstaff. Druids are trained in those. And it's a superior weapon to any of these. Plus, they're versatile. If you really want to thwack somebody and you don't have a shield, you're doing a D8 plus your strength damage. And her strength isn't phenomenal, but she can still, help out in a fight. And as a druid, a support class, sometimes that might be necessary. As far as, gear, she doesn't start with a shield. Could she go get a shield? Probably. So within the troop, for instance, it's quite clear that these characters are combat trained. You don't learn to be a level 1 fighter and never have put on armor, so they have access to armors and things that may not be on their sheet, not for their responsibilities day to day among the Hanatas of, keeping an eye out for trouble and stopping it, but if they have to go into a dangerous situation and say she wants to carry a shield, she could probably get one from the troop. I wouldn't even worry, because you notice none of them have, really any cash, but the troop provides. So, if there are some questions that go on with these about what I have and what I don't have, as a game master, it's pretty easy to go along with it. Now, expensive or, limited supply items, don't liberally give out potions of healing, perchance. Although there's an asterisk to that, and I'll get into that in a second. And, things like a spyglass, things that have a real financial cost, maybe not so much. But better armor than what the default is, I would say yes. All the characters should have it because they would spar and stuff like that. So they can go to the armory wagon, if there is such, and grab a chain shirt, throw that on, and before they get into some really serious difficulties. If your players think to do that, make them know in the session 0 that this is just what your characters walk around in. You could go and get something a little bit better. That's my guideline, and specifically, I'm not sure if that's exactly spelled out in the books, but the fact that there is somebody who sells weapons and armor at the Carnival, too, is something the players can upgrade into. But just by saying some of those basic things are still available, kind of obviates the need to go and follow the character creation guidelines and go step by step all the things the character should have. For instance, every fighter should have heavy armor. Chainmail or maybe splint or something like that. But if you look at a character like, let's see what Theros has. I'm pretty sure I know, but Theros, for a first level, actually he's not even a fighter, he's a barbarian. So as such, he doesn't really need a great deal, but he starts out with, okay, he's a terrible example actually. Okay, let's do this. So, when you're starting out with your basic gear, if you went with the book, you could look at all the various things that a character might start out with. But for instance, with Vanessa, she starts out with a sickle, her 2 daggers, and 4 darts, and no armor. Now, a druid on default starts with, I believe, leather armor. She doesn't have even that. Would it be too much to say that she goes off and gets some leather armor and increases her armor class by a point? Sure. Our armor class is 14. She could go up to a 15 and won't break anybody's heart. Certainly won't unbalance the game if they have access to that. That's the kind of thing they would have spent their starting 10, quick 10 gold and you've got armor. So that's something that I wouldn't even quibble with. If the players asked, well, can I have this? Can I have this? There's not a whole lot on my sheet for equipment that I have. Although the packs are brilliant thing for character creation because it lets you have a pretty decent starting selection of gear that makes sense to have all in one bundle. They don't outline all those items on here, by the way, so that's something you might want to fill out. If you want to know exactly what your character has on them at a given time, I recommend it. But that is not the most significant part of the statistics that are missing from a default character potentially. And I'm not talking about, cash, because, again, the troop takes care of everything, and the players will find cash. That is, things to buy luxuries for themselves that the troop might not otherwise provide. I'm talking about some of their core abilities they don't have listed here in the game. Why is that? Well, I chalk it up to two things. Number one, players get to make choices along the way, so it makes sense not to outline what the fighter's styles are. Let the player choose what their style is when they start. But that means that when you're doing the Session 0 and the character allotments, you should have a copy of the player's handbook out so you can make those decisions, and any other books that you want to use to give the players the options that you would like to give them. If you want to have Xanathar's Guide to Everything, you want to have Tasha's Cauldron of Everything handy so they have all the different selections available, have at it. You should, though, at the very least have the player's handbook so that you can look into things like fighter style, and in the case of casters, they don't have spells selected for them. Now, of course, the player's handbook can let you, write down a list of spells. And I'm here to kind of give you a help here and there. I will tell you this much. When you're playing a caster, spell cards make things so much easier. The amount of information that's packed on one of these spell cards basically means you no longer have to look into the book to find anything. Realistically, there aren't a whole lot of characters that have access to throngs of spells. So if you have one of these that's flavored to the spellcasting class you have, you just need a small number of cards to start out with, and you have everything that you need and can reference it right from the cards. This saves you a ton of time in combat and any kind of conflict, just seeing what your character's potential is. So, I highly endorse getting one of these. It's just a great game mastering tip, because, well, it's very handy to have. And if your players buy their own cards, that means something you don't have to buy. They're most often used by the players, although a game master can certainly make use of them too. That's why I have the complete set, but still, it's a nice thing to let people who aren't used to playing spellcasters have access to that. So I would definitely make those available if you have them. The unique spellcasters in the game, the Spell Dancers and the Agents of Jinx, use spells taken from the book. So if you have the decks, for example, Spell Dancer, you have the arcane spells, you're covered. They'll be able to find just about everything they need in there, I believe. So, that's nice, but make sure you look through the numbers and you make sure that everything they're entitled to is on here. That includes skills. Make sure the skills balance out. Everybody should have a couple of skills, and that is one of the things they did. They kind of made a Hanata's background. That is what's covered on here. So, for instance, if I look at Vanessa, she has, of course, the basic druid stuff. She has, as far as proficiency, she's proficient in herbalism kit. She has intelligence and wisdom saving throws. She's skilled with weapons and the armor that she is good for. Additional proficiencies. Choose 2 from Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, Survival. The common ones for druids, really. And those make sense for her character. With Theros here, his backgrounds are choosing 2 from Animal Handling, Athletics, Nature, Perception, and Survival. For Barbarian, makes sense. So you get to pick those 2. That means that your decisions aren't very complicated at first level, quite honestly. You mostly have just, oh, you're a first level? Poof, here's your set of stuff that you get. But, obviously, as you play the game, when your character gets close to leveling and you get to make decisions, those become your decisions. So, that's how you continue to make the character your own beyond that. So after you've looked over the character and made sure that you have everything that you're entitled to, every class feature, and you'll want to write those in. That's why I recommend photocopying these, or if you have the PDF, printing them. That will allow the players to write in the details as they come up. So useful. I don't have the heart to write on these, and even every little crease hurts. So, again, my tip from me to you. All right, everybody should have chosen a character. That's good. They should have a chance to read the character. That's also good. Generally steer them away from reading the secret unless they've absolutely confirmed that that's the character they want to play. Just because, again, it is a secret, and some people are very good at keeping player knowledge separate from what the character should know. But still, you take away a little bit of suspense here and there, and you could really have a lesser experience. Not significantly, but still, I would advise you to be honorable in that regard. All right, players, get out. Out. Out, 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 out. What I have next to say is for Game Masters only. So, and this is not because I don't trust you. This is because if you're a player, you want to experience this as your character, with all this stuff coming to you as it comes. Not because you knew about it in advance and because the storyline says it's going to come. So with that said, leave. Amscray, gone. Are they gone? Game Masters? Make sure there's no players watching. I have to count on your honor to say that anybody who wants to play the game and really enjoy it, at this point is gone. Now I'm going to start talking about some of the deep and abiding roots for the Game Master. Alright. Now I've said before, there's 24 characters, and they won't all be chosen unless you have a really ridiculously large group. And if you have that many people, whew, good luck. You're going to need it. But I suppose if you were running 4 tables of 6 each, that would be kind of cool. You could have them all going simultaneously. We're going to have to try that at a con one of these days. But anyhow, so you're only going to have the players that were selected to really focus on. But that doesn't mean the other characters don't still exist. Every single one of them becomes a player character that you can use as you see fit, and probably should. Not because the players need the backup, though that can certainly excuse a dark situation with the dice turn on them. All of a sudden, Theros bells out a challenge from across the way. Sirika the Blind Wind comes running up. Fleegan has picked somebody's dagger that they were reaching for before he has a chance to throw it. And Brandel is getting ready to throw she's got a bolt of fire on her finger, and she's idly twirling it, threatening a person who doesn't want to take a painful burn that maybe you should calm down a little bit. All of these characters are at your beck and call as you need. So, hey, you have your number of players, or 24 minus the number of your players, as extra NPCs that you can use as you see fit. Considering some of them have pretty useful roles. A cleric, of course, has access to healing spells. Characters who are inclined towards academia, like Brandel is very, very smart. Vix is very, very clever. They can help you out if your players get stuck on a riddle or a puzzle. If a party is all maxed out for combat and all of a sudden something with a little subtlety is called for, there's nothing stopping you from going off and going and fighting Savrith or someone to kind of move up and take care of something for you. And that actually makes sense. You know the roles the other characters can play and therefore could realistically call on them. Unless as a game master you decide that you want to have amnesia and these other characters don't exist in your campaign, which ties off some loose ends, certainly. I found it rather enjoyable, though, to keep them around, because it's a large carnival, and there's plenty for everybody to do. So, for instance, I even wrote up a little storyline where Theros got into a bit of trouble, because there's a local girl who's accusing him of kissing and telling, and all of a sudden, her father went to the guards because this carny, took advantage of his poor daughter. And, of course, Theros would be rather shamefaced about the whole thing. At least he was in this storyline. He might have bragged in secret about, his little tryst, but realistically, his father would be outraged. How dare you put your desires in front of the needs of the troop? We need to carry on without stirring up trouble. This just encourages... Oh, wait, sorry. How dare you think with your own lusts rather than think about the troop? You put us into danger because you couldn't control yourself. Discipline is the sign of someone who is ready to be an adult, and something you have shown to be lacking. I sometimes wonder if you should have been included with the Zatis. It is time for you to grow up and accept your responsibilities. The players didn't see that, but I imagine it all happening in my head, and as they bumped into Theros later, he's shamefacedly guarding the food tent, because that's all that Borag would trust him with. But I could use those characters. When the characters needed backup, it only made sense that other of the young warriors and spellcasters and clerics would show up to try to help out as they could. So, yes, having those other characters can be really handy. But now, they've made their selections. So, what you should do, in my humble opinion, is gather up their characters. Take a look at them. It's good to note the background elements to them, but most of them have fairly similar backgrounds. If there's an exception here or an exception there, like, for instance, Glyn being raised by wolves and being found in nature. It's a pretty stark background element. But he's been with the troop long enough that he is normalized into the society of the troop, so, you don't have to worry about him wanting to go and run wild at nights. Should be too exhausted to do that anyhow. But what you should note, even if you just write a note for yourself in a one-word sum-up of what the secret for the person is, so that you can entwine that further into the story. If somebody is playing Ventov Drungan, for instance, the son of Stuf and Lena, and himself not afflicted with their twisted bones disease, so he is just a dwarf of the dwarves, and an attractive young dwarf at that, who's got dreams about setting out away from his family and finding out what being a dwarf is like. Not just a member of the Hanatas, but a dwarf. Well, that's a secret. But it's probably the easiest of all the secrets, to be honest with you. He just really kind of wants to get away from the troop for a bit, and he'll have his opportunity eventually. You should note that. You should also possibly keep an eye out for anything that you can use as a plot element. Again, going back to Ventov, Ventov has a battle axe, a magical battle axe that he was given by some adventurers. In it, he found there's a secret compartment that had a rolled-up map in it. He wants to find out what's on the map, because he can't read it. Nobody he's ever shown the map to can read the writing. So, that tells you a couple of things. Number one, he must never have taken it to Vestia or Skizig, because they could probably cast Comprehend Languages and read it, unless it's protected by some other magic, which is something you might decide. But number two, was he meant to find that? Is that an element of his character that they wanted him to find that map and eventually? And if so, to what end? Or maybe they didn't know it was there. Maybe they find out later. Maybe they realize it was a mistake giving him that axe before they got the map, and now they want the map back. You have just created your own vector with just a single magical item. And that stuff is all outside of Gooey Cube. That's on you creating your own content and adding it into what's going on in the game. Now, it may seem like there's so much stuff in the game that you can't possibly add anything else. Trust me. If it means cutting out a few encounters and tying the characters in more closely so that they're more immersed in the game because things are happening to them on a personal level to their characters, it's worth it. It's worth taking the extra time to lavish the attention on the characters, especially if they show you that they want it and they're reciprocating. They're taking what you give them and they're putting more effort in. That's perfect. So that, in my mind, is how you prepare and how you set up your session 0. The player should already be primed with the being Hanataz stuff. If you already catch them speaking in any of the language or jargon, awesome. If you catch your players bristling when somebody calls them a shazat, which is a mild curse and an insult that an outsider would take a corrupted version of a word that we use and call us that, because they do it all the time in this story, they should be outraged. Their characters should show offense. And some of them might show more than others. See, Theros, he's kind of an angry young man with that barbarian thing going on. If they do that, they understand where they're at. They act appropriately. The role-playing intensifies. The immersion gets deeper and stronger and richer. So, it's good that they have that. It's good that they read it. It's good that they absorb that. You will find that jargon thrown into the dialogue in the various narrators' cues. I suggest if you paraphrase it, you still find ways to work the jargon back in. It makes the world more Zayathe. So, you could turn only an hour or so to accomplish all of that. Your session 0 might only be the opening of a night. Just enough for the players to choose their characters. Maybe you even let them choose their characters in advance. Certainly possible. I kind of did that myself. And if that's the case, I really recommend that the opportunity that they have to choose their characters, they've had a chance to look at the characters, they've looked at the art, they've looked at the classes, and maybe they've taken a moment to try to understand, what is an agent of Jinx? What is a spell dancer? Do I want to play one of them? Are they unique enough that it draws me, it compels me to play one of these? Unfortunately, there's only one spell dancer, so if multiple people want to play spell dancers, you can either clone her and give her a different name, or make up another one. That's fine. I trust that as a game master, you can figure out how to work them in, or copy and paste. Just cut out from somebody else's background and secret, put that in, and they're a spell dancer instead. That's perfectly fine. If you have multiple spell dancers in the group, though, it is going to kind of tax your spellbook cards if you use those, so just so you know. It is possible to play two different casters of completely different spells, but, it might be a little bit taxing. Another thing, bear in mind, it's into the world, and I'm not saying you have to go by this. Just like anything, you could change it at your whim. Spell dancers are all female Hanatas. It's a tradition. It may even be that it's impossible for a male to learn spell dancing. I don't know. But in your world, you choose how you want to do it. It's probably the only real thing that is gender typed. Besides the rules of the Pravda and the manga and that stuff, but in general, it's flavorful because, again, you rarely see in the stereotypes of the gypsies the fortune teller being male. It's usually some old crone, and that is kind of the typecast again of how the whole of the Hanatas are set up. All right, so now we get into the super secret part. This is going to test how well you've read the book. Okay? Think about your players. You've got a decision to make, don't you? And again, if you are playing, turn it off now. Because what I'm going to say will ruin a big part of the suspense, but it's important game masters think about this very carefully. Okay. You have the Mugda. The Mugda, a forbidden male who gets the sight. An omen of incalculable disaster to the Hanatas. They have centuries of tradition that it is a disaster if a male should gain the sight. They are cursed to bring misfortune to the Hanatas. And guess what? One of those people who are sitting on the other side of your screen is going to get to be the Mugda. Yes, sir. Mugda. Now, you have to choose. And in addition to that, just to keep the craziness going, one of the players is also attuned. Now, how you play off a tune and how I chose to play it is they're psychic. Okay? They have a special tie-in with primarily ghosts, and they're sensitive to such things. And boy, did I have fun with that. So whenever there's anything supernatural, you have a cue that the attune can start feeling something weird. Even if they didn't have any great reason to, but even better if they do. They recommend Glyn be the attune because, why? He grew up in the wilderness with a ghost. Read his background, it's some pretty freaky stuff. But he makes a great attuned. But here's the thing. I recommend, don't care which character gets it. Those are player roles. Think about which players are going to get the most out of it. The person who is the Mugda, they're behind the 8 ball. Some people will shrink under that pressure. Some people will feel that they're being singled out and picked on. And certainly the character might feel that fate has chosen to turn its back on them because they're given it something they never wanted. And all of a sudden, they're passing out when something happens. They're experiencing the worst of the portents and dreams because the bad things that are coming are all spelled out in front of them. It's a terrible thing to consider, which makes it perfect for role-playing. So, if you have somebody who's particularly good about playing a character who is cursed and working their way out from under it, struggling against a dark fate, that's a perfect person for this. If there's somebody that you're trying to bring out, somebody that you're trying to elevate, might not be a bad role for them. It might be just surprised to see that person, everybody else might rally around that person. And maybe if you want to shake things up a little bit, maybe somebody who's been forgotten in the last game you've run, you want to give them a little extra time? There you go, give them that. Same thing goes with the attune, but the attune's a bit cooler. The attune mostly gets inspiration, they get secrets, they get tips. It's not quite as baneful, certainly. But they're a nice companion so that all the weird stuff isn't just happening to one person. There's weird stuff to go on tap. Now, this is on top of all the other weird stuff the group is going to find anyhow, because it is a dark campaign. There's going to be bad things to be shared by everybody. But the person who's playing the Mugda, they're definitely going to feel it. You have to choose if you're going to include that element of the game, and I hope you do. It's some pretty good stuff as you go along, because that is going to have an impact throughout the campaign. It will constantly be referenced back. Whenever anything supernatural comes or has to deal with this dark future, yeah, don't forget who has those things on them. So, the only thing is, the Mu'ugda has to be male. Again, you can gender flip it if you really want to or something like that, but it is something to think about. So if somebody is playing a female and they get the sight, then great, they're just going to be another troop's mother. Or maybe eventually, take over for Mother Sylvenza, who is the leader of the Blue Veil troops' spiritual needs through the sight. It's got to be a male. So that makes it stick the more, that it's unnatural that a male gets the sight. They don't usually. But this is a 1 in 100,000 chance. It just happens that on this night, they get the sight. So, you have to think that. That is a very important part, and it can really, really make the game personal and special for the people who are selected, even if it seems like sometimes a lot of bad stuff is going to be hitting them. It's just how these things go. It's not really terribly unfair, because they suddenly become some of the most important people in this game, but yeah. One other thing I will caution about in the setup of this. Think about how long you want to make the game for the Darkest Dream. I could not see fitting all of the events in a single afternoon. I couldn't do it, quite honestly. You've got, and if you've read the adventure already, you've got the encounter at the Old Well. You've got the dungeon at the end. In the middle, you're going to have encounters. If I have spellcasters, they're not going to have any magic left. They'll be down to cantrips by the time half of that story is gone. So they need to be able to rest. So I picked up the action the day before Darktide. The opening encounter, the opening scene with the Mad Bear, happened in the morning of the second to the last showing for the Carnival the day before. And all the stuff that happened that day was your preliminary workup. The players did not have the time to go and investigate the old well. They had too much to do. They investigated the shed, which again you'll read if you haven't gotten that far. They got to dance around the Carnival with a couple of choice encounters. They got worked up into a bit of trouble meeting some of the NSREs that I popped in, lethal and non-lethal. But it was good enough for 3 good sessions of action before it got too dark. Things closed down. They had that important opening dream sequence. All of them got one. And again, the person that I chose for the Maugda, he got the bad one. It's pretty brutal. Yes. The person who was the attuned got his vision, and it's dark. If you have any skill in storytelling and using voice and using drama and pacing and pitch to tell those dreams, it matters. But we'll get into that in a future video about pacing and all of that. This is about preparation. That is a decision you have to make in the beginning. I made it really quickly when I realized I want them to explore as much of this as possible so they can enjoy this to its fullest. If you decide it's all going to take place on Dark Tide's Eve, if it's all on Dark Tide, the actual day, you're going to have to shorten it. You're going to have to admit there's going to be encounters that they're never going to stumble across. And that may be fine. Goodness knows, there's a plethora of encounters they may never come across. And it almost might feel like it's almost contrived that they keep getting hit with everything. Everything happens to this group. And it will. I mean, that's how these go. But I just pitched everything back a day, spread things out a little bit so they weren't feeling like the day was forced. And we ended up getting 7 sessions out of it. It went, really well. With that pacing. So that was a decision that I made, and it went fine. I think that is a bit of advice that's actually in one of the books. So I would advise taking that if it's important to you to get more encounters done. If you're the kind of person who never tracks time, you could say that they get it all done in the course of a day, and that's fine. I like things running a little bit more realistically. If time stops, then it should be a darn good supernatural reason for it. But, yeah, that's my advice for the preparation for the opening for The Darkest Dream. It was a little long, and I apologize for it, but really there's a lot to get into with these player characters. They need to be fleshed out, the players need to be prepared, and they need to read the stuff on their characters so that they can feel their character's intent, personality, background that will help to immerse them into the game, and that is ultimately what you're looking for. Some of the most detailed pre-generated characters you'll ever see, with all of the things to play around with. So, that being said, that's pretty much it. There are some Game Master decisions to make, of course. How much you're going to let the characters tinker with the numbers on the sheet, that's up to you. Just remember the characters should be a bit beefier because they're going to be first level for longer. So, as a result, they are heroic in scope. So, be cool on that. The rest of it, it's really going to be up to you on the decisions that you make on how The Darkest Dream runs for you. But my advice was on a slower pace, letting the players enjoy the different encounters and letting the adventure come to them rather than forcing it really quickly. And trying everything you can to let the players feel like they're in control. They decide where they're going to go. They have the agency to make it turn out well or make it turn out badly. Yeah, they can make a lot of decisions. They certainly can. And there are a lot of bad things that they can head off with clever roleplay. And they can get into a lot of trouble if they blunder into things. But this should be something that you're going to remember for a long time. You'll remember it for the decisions they made, for the moments they cracked everybody up, and how they brought those characters to life, and their struggles were played out before you. And hopefully, if you're doing things right, they'll remember it for the rest of their lives as an amazing adventure, dark, sinister, mysterious, with lighthearted whimsy in the middle of it. Good times as well as bad, that they rallied together with their friends and averted a great evil, ultimately. So, thanks for joining me. I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. This was my advice for dealing with the pre-generation characters with Session 0 and preparation up to the opening scene when the curtain rises, which is where we'll start with the next session here under Dungeon Tutor. Thank you! Until that next time, farewell.